You were told that loyalty is everything, that the people who love you want the best for you, that the circle you built around yourself is your greatest asset. That is the lie they fed you from birth. Not because the people around you are evil. Some of them love you. Some of them would die for you. And that is exactly what makes them dangerous. Because destruction does not always arrive with a blade. Sometimes it arrives with a warm voice, a familiar face, and a hand on your shoulder that holds you in place just long enough for your potential to rot. Machiavelli understood this. 500 years ago, he watched brilliant men fall, not because of their enemies, but because of the people they trusted most, the men in their inner circle, the ones who smiled at the feast and whispered fear into their ears at night. There are 5 specific types of people in your circle right now, 5 archetypes, and at least 3 of them are already working against you, not out of malice, but out of something far more insidious, their own fear of what you might become. The 5th one will explain why you have been shrinking for years and calling it peace. If you are not ready for this, close the video. Go back to the crowd. But if you want to know the truth about why your life has not moved, stay and listen carefully. There is someone in your life whose entire purpose, conscious or not, is to keep you comfortable, and they are the most dangerous person you know. The average man calls this person his best friend, his partner, his mother, the person who says, "You don't have to push so hard," and means it with genuine tenderness, the person who hands you relief every time you are about to transform. Most people get this wrong because they confuse care with support. Care keeps you warm. Support makes you stronger. These are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. The psychological concept here is called homeostasis. Dr. Henry Cloud, in his clinical work on boundaries and personal growth, identified this pattern precisely. The people closest to you are biologically and emotionally invested in keeping you the same, not because they hate your growth, because your growth destabilizes the system they built their identity around. When you change, they lose the version of you they understood. And humans will go to extraordinary lengths, subtle, loving, suffocating lengths, to prevent that loss. Julius Caesar understood what comfort architects do to men. He watched Pompey, once Rome's greatest general, grow soft inside the political comfort of the Senate's approval. Pompey stopped moving. He stopped conquering. He traded the glacier for the warm room. Caesar did not make that mistake. He crossed the Rubicon cold and alone, against every voice in his circle telling him to stop. Here is your practical instruction. Identify one person in your life who consistently appears when you are about to make a difficult leap forward. Notice the timing. Notice that their arrival always brings relief and never momentum. That is your comfort architect. You do not have to remove them from your life, but you do have to remove them from your decision-making process. Make your next move without consulting them. Not once, not as a test, as a policy. Because the next person is quieter and far more precise. You have someone around you who reflects your worst version back at you, and you mistake it for familiarity. This is the person who knew you before, the one who references your failures as context, the one who says, "Remember when you tried that before?" Not to wound you, but simply because they only know the old you. To them, you are still that person, and every interaction reinforces the identity you are trying to leave behind. Robert Greene in The 48 Laws of Power articulates this with surgical precision in Law 10. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky, not because their misfortune is contagious in some mystical sense, but because the emotional and psychological frameworks of people who have stagnated will be projected onto you continuously. You will absorb their ceiling as your own.
The psychological mechanism is identity anchoring. The people who knew you at your lowest have a vested cognitive interest in keeping your identity stable. To them, change is not growth. It is betrayal of the shared story you built together. Galileo understood this. His closest academic peers, men who knew him before his discoveries, were the first to denounce him. Not the church initially, his own circle, because he had outgrown the framework they shared, and his growth made their stagnation visible. Your instruction: for the next 30 days, count how many times someone in your circle references a past version of you in a way that limits your present action. Do not argue. Do not correct them. Simply count. The number will disturb you, and the pattern will become impossible to ignore. You are still here. Good. The fragile ones already left. There is someone in your circle who calls themselves a realist. They are not a realist. They are a pessimist who learned to use the language of pragmatism as social armor, and they have infected your risk calculus for years. The difference is surgical. A realist assesses probability and acts. A pessimist, disguised as a realist, assesses probability and stops. Every time you bring an idea, they bring a statistic. Every time you see a door, they see a wall. And because they frame it as wisdom, as protection from naive thinking, you have been listening. The average man calls this person grounded. He keeps this person around because their voice sounds like caution, and caution sounds like intelligence. But Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "It is better to be impetuous than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her down, you must beat and batter her." He was not endorsing recklessness. He was exposing the cost of chronic hesitation disguised as wisdom. Psychologist Martin Seligman's research on learned helplessness shows exactly what long-term exposure to pessimistic framing does to the brain. It trains you to believe that your actions are disconnected from outcomes, that effort is pointless, that the system will not respond to you. This is not a mood, it is a neurological pattern, and it can be installed in you by repeated exposure to a single person. Napoleon recognized this. He systematically purged pessimists from his command structure, not because they were wrong about risks, but because a general who expects defeat creates defeat. He surrounded himself with men who planned for victory and managed risk. The distinction saved campaigns. Your instruction? The next time this person delivers their assessment of your idea, respond with one sentence. What would have to be true for this to work? And stay silent. Watch them. If they cannot answer that question, they are not a realist. They are a drain wearing a professional mask. Do you know what the fourth type is? They do not criticize you at all. That is the problem. There is someone who needs you, deeply, chronically, and their need has become so central to your sense of self that removing it feels like self-destruction. This is the most invisible of the five, because being needed feels like power. It feels like purpose. But dependency, when it is one-directional and permanent,
is not a relationship. It is an extraction system, and you are the resource.
The psychological term is enmeshment. First described clearly in family systems theory by Salvador Minuchin, enmeshment is the condition where boundaries between two people dissolve to the point that one person's emotional state becomes the other's entire responsibility. The enmeshed person stops asking, "What do I want?" and begins asking, "What do they need?" in every decision, including the decisions that shape their future. The Knights Templar provide the cold historical lesson here. The most powerful military financial institution in medieval Europe allowed itself to become so entangled in the financial dependency of French nobility, lending to kings, absorbing debts, becoming indispensable, that when King Philip IV of France needed to eliminate them, their own enmeshment made them vulnerable. They had confused being needed with being protected. Philip dissolved the order in 1307, arrested its leaders, and executed them. Being indispensable to a dependent is not power. It is a cage that feels like a throne. Your instruction: identify one relationship where your participation is driven by their need rather than mutual exchange. Set one boundary in that relationship this week. Not a conversation about setting a boundary, an actual boundary. Watch their response. Their response will tell you everything about whether this relationship can survive your sovereignty. This one will cut you. The loyal traitor is not an enemy. They are not jealous in any obvious way. They celebrate your wins, loudly, publicly, convincingly. But in the quiet moments, in the private conversations, in the subtle framing of your ambitions to others, they sand the edges off your identity. They introduce doubt under the guise of concern. They position your goals as slightly unrealistic, not enough to fight about, just enough to erode. This is triangulation, a concept formalized in systems psychology by Murray Bowen. Triangulation is the use of a third party to process anxiety in a relationship. The loyal traitor triangulates you constantly, telling others their concerns about you, managing your reputation in the background, creating a version of you in other people's minds that serves their comfort. Robert Greene names this archetype directly in the 33 Strategies of War. Beware the false ally, the person who appears in your corner while quietly positioning themselves to benefit from your controlled decline. Cosimo de' Medici, the architect of modern political banking, and perhaps the most sophisticated power operator of Renaissance Florence, survived 5 decades of political warfare not by defeating his open enemies, but by identifying his loyal traitors first. He kept detailed, private knowledge of every man who served him and what motivated them. He never confronted a loyal traitor directly. He simply removed their access, quietly, permanently, without explanation. Your instruction? Stop explaining your next move to everyone in your circle. Tell them nothing for 30 days. Then watch who becomes uncomfortable with your silence. Watch who starts probing for information. Watch who becomes subtly hostile when they cannot map your trajectory. The loyal traitor cannot survive your opacity. Silence is the blade they cannot defend against. Comment below right now, 3 words only. Write, "I move silently." Now I am going to be honest with you. If you take this path, if you actually audit your circle, hold your tongue, remove your dependencies, and begin operating from sovereignty, you will be lonely. Not temporarily, not as a phase. The higher you build, the fewer people can climb with you.
That is not a metaphor. That is the structural reality of ascent. This is the cold that no one tells you about. The wolf does not run with the flock. That is precisely the point. The wolf is free. But freedom at this level has no warmth in it, no crowd, no easy validation. There will be nights when the silence of your own construction will feel indistinguishable from abandonment. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513 while imprisoned, stripped of every position he had ever held, tortured by the very political class he had served for 15 years, and exiled to a farmhouse outside Florence. Alone, disgraced, politically dead, and he wrote the most important manual on power the Western world has ever produced.
Not in spite of the exile, because of it. Because when you strip away every comfort, every false ally, every dependent who kept you small, what remains is pure clarity. What remains is you. The real architecture of your mind, unobstructed. This freedom is cold, but it is the only freedom that is truly yours. You made it to the end. That alone separates you from most people who clicked this video and retreated within the first 2 minutes. The discomfort was the filter. You passed it. You now have 5 names to examine, not to hate, not to dramatically cut from your life in some performative purge, but to see, clearly, finally, without the fog of loyalty and habit, for what they are and what they cost you. The sovereign does not move in anger. He moves in clarity. Subscribe. Not because I asked you to. Subscribe because you are done explaining yourself to people who were never equipped to understand what you are building. Because you are done mistaking proximity for alliance. Because somewhere, underneath the comfort and the noise and the careful management of other people's feelings about your life, there is a version of you that has been waiting, cold, patient, and absolutely certain. It is time to meet him. If you want what the algorithm will not let me say in a public video, what I can only share with those who have chosen to go further, the membership is below. That is where the real architecture begins.